It was a Tuesday, just another Tuesday in a small town where Tuesdays were reliably, comfortably the same, but this one would be different. It would break the town. A classroom filled with 9-year-olds and their devoted teacher simply vanished. One moment they were learning about long division, their futures stretching out like an open road. The next, they were gone. A ghost story whispered into existence. Where did they go? Why? The school bell rang that afternoon, but 11 people would not hear it. Room 104 at Havenwood Elementary grew still. The afternoon sun slanted through the large windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the silent air. On the blackboard, a half-finished math problem waited for a solution that would never come. Havenwood, Ohio. The name itself sounded like a promise of safety, of community, a place sheltered from the harsh realities of the wider world. The biggest news? The high school football team's latest victory, or the prize-winning pumpkin at the fall festival. It was idyllic, perhaps too idyllic. Mrs. Vance had taught the parents of some of her students. She was part of the town's fabric, a familiar, comforting presence. The children were the town's future. Little Timmy couldn't pronounce his R's, drew a perfect dinosaur. Sarah wanted to be an astronaut. The town sat in a shallow valley, rolling hills and dense forests. Past the last suburban house, the land grew wilder. Miller's Junkyard, rusted, sprawling, kids warned to stay away. This geography would be central to the mystery. That Tuesday, August 25th, 2019, began like any other. The morning was bright and clear, with a hint of the coming autumn chill in the air. Parents dropped their children off at Havenwood Elementary, colorful backpacks and jackets on hooks. Mrs. Vance greeted each of her 10 students with her signature warm smile. The morning schedule was routine: attendance, the Pledge of Allegiance, a session of reading aloud. The book was a classic adventure story about getting lost and finding the way home. The sounds from room 104 were normal: the murmur of a teacher's voice, the occasional burst of childish laughter. Timeline investigators pieced together a maddeningly ordinary morning, right up until it wasn't. 10:15 a.m., a teacher walking past saw Mrs. Vance at the blackboard explaining a math concept. 10:45 a.m., a parent volunteer dropped off cupcakes for a student's birthday. She remembered seeing the class getting their jackets on. Mrs. Vance told her they were about to go on a surprise nature walk to collect leaves for an art project. It was the last confirmed sighting of the entire class. What happened after 10:45 a.m. is a black hole. The hours that followed the discovery of the empty classroom were a blur of escalating panic. As the sun set, casting long, menacing shadows across the school playground, the grim reality began to set in. This was not a simple case of lost children. This was something else entirely. Police cars, news vans, the vehicles of worried parents clogged the streets around Havenwood Elementary. Search parties, grim-faced police officers, hundreds of civilian volunteers combed every inch of the surrounding area. They searched the woods, the creeks, the abandoned farmhouses. They walked shoulder to shoulder. Their hopeful calls of the children's names echoed through the trees, only to be answered by the wind. The families of the missing were thrust into an unbearable spotlight. They held televised press conferences, their voices trembling as they pleaded for the safe return of their loved ones. The investigation, massive in scale, hit one dead end after another. The FBI was called in, setting up a command center in the school gymnasium. They interviewed hundreds of people, chased down thousands of tips, but every lead turned cold. There were no witnesses, there was no ransom demand. One year bled into the next. The search parties grew smaller, then stopped altogether. The news vans drove away, chasing the next big story. But for Havenwood, the story never ended. The seasons changed, but the emotional landscape remained frozen in a perpetual state of winter. The posters in the shop windows grew tattered and faded. The faces on them stayed etched in the town's memory, forever 9 years old. The case went cold, relegated to the dusty shelves of unsolved mysteries. It became a cautionary tale whispered to a new generation. For the families, the passage of time offered no healing. Hope had dwindled to a fragile, flickering ember. Havenwood itself was a changed town. The easy trust that had once defined it was gone, replaced by a quiet, pervasive fear. The elementary school renamed Room 104. It was now a storage closet. No one wanted to teach in there. The disappearance became part of the town's folklore, a dark chapter in its history. The original detectives retired or moved on, passing thick binders filled with dead-end reports to younger officers who knew the story only as a local legend. Every year on the anniversary, a local news segment would play the old frantic footage and end with the same question: where are they? The breakthrough, when it finally came, didn't arrive with a dramatic confession or a brilliant piece of detective work. It arrived with the screech of metal and the groan of a collapsing roof. Today is August 25th, 2025, 6 years to the day since the class vanished. Miller's Junkyard, that sprawling graveyard of forgotten things on the edge of town, was being cleared out to make way for a new housing development. A demolition crew was using a heavy crane to move a pile of derelict school buses. As the crane lifted the first bus, the one on the bottom of the pile, its rusted-out floor gave way. What fell out onto the dirt was not junk. It was a small, worn sneaker, then another. The crane operator, a man who had lived in Havenwood his whole life, froze. He knew what day it was. With a trembling hand, he shut down the machine and called his foreman. The foreman called the police. Within minutes, the demolition site was swarming with officers. They approached the collapsed bus cautiously. They peered inside the dark, cavernous space beneath the pile of buses. What they found was unthinkable. A hidden world. Thin, dirty mattresses, stacks of canned food, jugs of water. They were dazed, pale, blinking in the sunlight they hadn't seen in years. There were 10 of them, no longer children but teenagers. And with them was an older woman, her hair now completely gray. It was Eleanor Vance. The news spread through the town like a wildfire. The news helicopters circled. The crowd stopped in stunned disbelief. When investigators revisited the cold case files, they looked again at that one cryptic word on the blackboard: junkyard. They looked at the teacher's history with a new, horrifying perspective. They found something they had missed before: a deep, paranoid distrust of the modern world. She had become convinced that a major societal collapse was imminent, a catastrophe she needed to shield her students from. A faded receipt, found tucked in her desk drawer during the initial search, was for an unusually large purchase of canned goods and survival gear from a store 2 towns over, dated a week before the disappearance. Then there was the child's drawing. It showed his class and Mrs. Vance inside what looked like a big yellow cave. His parents had thought it was just a child's imagination. Now they saw it for what it was: a plan. Mrs. Vance had been preparing her sanctuary, her ark, for months, right under everyone's noses. On that fateful Tuesday, she had not abducted her students. She had led them. The surprise nature walk was a ruse. She walked them through a little used path that connected directly to the back of Miller's Junkyard. She led them to the hollowed-out bus, sealed the entrance, and their 6-year ordeal had begun. The reunion was a scene of raw, overwhelming emotion played out in the sterile hallways of Havenwood General Hospital. The children were gone, replaced by thin, pale teenagers with haunted eyes who barely recognized the tear-streaked faces before them. Timmy, 9 then, 15 now, the dinosaur kid who'd never been to high school. Sarah, the would-be astronaut, looking at her parents like strangers. Eleanor Vance was arrested. What was the charge? Kidnapping? Her lawyer said she was protecting, not harming. The teenagers gave conflicting accounts. Mrs. Vance, strict but caring, they said. They had been taught to fear the outside world. Psychologists arrived to guide re-entry. How do you explain 6 years of change? Technology, culture, personal growth. Public reaction was a tidal wave of shock, relief, and anger. The teenagers, the junkyard class, became reluctant celebrities. Privacy vanished under the spotlight. Their families tried to shield them. They were in therapy, catching up on education, learning how to be in a world they were taught to fear. The rescue closed one chapter and opened another, far more complicated one. Today, Havenwood is no longer defined by loss but by a strange and complicated survival. The junkyard has been cleared, the housing development built. The memory of what lay hidden there for 6 years is now woven into the town's very soul. Eleanor Vance's trial was the final somber act in the public drama. She was found guilty of unlawful imprisonment and child endangerment. She was sentenced to a long stay in a secure psychiatric facility. Throughout the trial, she remained steadfast that she had saved her students. She saw herself as a shepherd, not a jailer. Her lack of remorse was perhaps the most chilling part of all. The town of Havenwood continues to heal, but the scars remain. Parents hold their children a little tighter. There's a new awareness. The unthinkable can happen right here, on a quiet street, in a familiar school. Not the mystery of where they were, but of why. How does a beloved teacher convince herself that stealing the lives of 10 children is an act of love? How do 10 children adapt to a lie so completely that it becomes their truth? The children are home, but a part of them will forever be in that rusted metal box, and the town will never forget the 6 long years of silence.